and we're already live on YouTube. A few more seconds and then we'll kick off. In any case, they have a few seconds before we really start. But let me start by introducing the event and also introducing all the experts you see here. So first of all, this is an FSR Insights event, right? We run these once a month on a Wednesday, and it's already the third time. And the FSR Insights always start from research, FSR research, and of course, that also implies FSR researchers. And in this case, I'm very happy to have Golnush with us and Piero, the two researchers of this event. And they will give us some insights into research they did very recently on all the decarbonization policies and instruments we have already in Europe. And they looked at the past and they looked at the future. And they've also been digging in some of the statistics, some of the cost numbers we have for renewable electricity and for hydrogen. So very happy that they will give us a teaser here of their research. Of course, it's only 1 hour, so it's a teaser. And if you are interested to know more, you know who to engage with, and they will definitely guide you to their studies. Then also, we are very happy to have two discussants with us. We have Ronnie and we have Anne. And what should you know about them? Well, they are the academic discussants, so they both have a good academic track record. Anne has a lot of experience at European Commission. She's currently at Sciences Po, and she's as a background I saw in mathematics and statistics. So as we're going to discuss some numbers here, it's good to have a statistician with us, and we're going to talk technology. So that's why we have Ronnie here. He's at KU Leuven, also equally experienced, and he's our technology expert of this event. So that's enough to set the scene, and we'll kick off just like we did a month ago with a short presentation of Gulnush. We'll have a poll question where we ask your opinion, and then we will have our discussant. Then we will go to Piero in the second half hour, and with Ronnie as the main discussant. Meanwhile, you have the chat at the bottom, you have a Q&A functionality, so don't hesitate to put any comment you have, any question in there, and I'll try to pick it up during our discussion. So, Gulnush, the floor is yours, or as we say, the screen is yours.
Thank you, Lo, for the nice introduction. So now it should be shared. So as Leo said, this event is basically based on this study Pierre and I did, the cost-effective decarbonization study, and it will be published soon on the FSR website, and you can check it soon. And I'm going to present for the first part of this presentation the EU decarbonization policies, the past until 2020 basically, and for future 2030 and 2050 frameworks. For the 2020 framework, basically we know that it was the first time that the sustainability targets were introduced to be met by a certain time, 2020. The targets were 20% reduction of GHG emissions, 20% share of renewables in final energy consumption, which were binding at national level, and 20% improvement of energy efficiency. So these are only targets. As we know, setting the targets is only the first step, and to achieve them, we need to provide an environment that makes this achievement possible. And the right framework should have been set. So under the 2020 framework, policies and instruments were introduced, and some existing policies were also used, such as EU ETS. So were the targets met or not? Well, the latest available data by 2018 shows that the GHG emission target was already met. It was 23%, even higher than 2020 target. For renewables, well, the measure was 18.9%, and it is most likely that by end of 2020, we meet this target as well. But the challenge and the challenging target was the energy efficiency. The measure for this target was 15% in 2018, and it is going to be very hard to meet it by end of 2020. Maybe the COVID pandemic and the emergence of the pandemic would impact it, but then it cannot be attributed to the efforts that were specifically taken to actually improve energy efficiency. So what is happening on the member state level? Well, for energy efficiency, as said before, the challenge still remains, and member states are challenging to meet their targets. For renewables, it is much better. More than half of member states already met their targets by 2018, and the others are on their way to meet their targets by end of 2020. So this success can be attributed actually to the large subsidies that have been allocated to renewables and the integration of renewables. And this is where we want to know your opinion. This is the first online poll. You can choose between the answers. Basically, in 2016, around 75 billion euros of subsidies were allocated to renewable energy, mostly renewable electricity, which this amount slightly reduced to 69 billion in 2018, which is still a high amount. So what we want to know is to know your opinion and to know if you think that this was an expensive approach and a less costly approach could have been adopted, or no, this was, of course, although it was an expensive approach, the achievements actually justify the costs. So please go ahead and let us know what you think. So I'm now seeing the results, and it's very interesting because we have 52% saying that a less costly approach could have been adopted, and 48% saying that the achievement justified the cost. And so more or less the same results for these two options. That's interesting because, well, based on the data that was available through the European Environment Agency, the GHG emission that was avoided due to integration of renewable electricity increased from 65 million tons of CO2 equivalent in 2008 to 328 in 2016, which is a very large success in terms of avoided GHG emissions. Again, back to subsidies given to renewable electricity, the 25 billion in 2008 tripled to 75 billion euros in 2016. Comparing these two measures and using these two measures, we estimated that the subsidy cost per avoided GHG emissions decreased from 385 euro per ton of CO2 in 2008 to 229 in 2016. So a 41% reduction in the cost, which is also following a decreasing trend. So going back to the question, of course, it was an expensive path, but also we got something out of it. CO2 emissions decreased considerably, but maybe we can change it to another question. What should we do in the future? Should we also take the same path, the same expensive approach? Or no, we have to reconsider when we want to, for example, support new technologies for energy transition. Talking about the future, so what is next for the EU in terms of policies and sustainability targets? The next step is the Clean Energy Package, which covers 2021 to 2030, with more ambitious targets considering compared to 2020 framework. At least 40% GHG emission reductions, 32% share of renewables, and at least 32.5% of energy efficiency to be achieved by 2030. So these targets are more ambitious, so they needed some instruments to be revised, and they needed also some policies and some new policies and instruments. The renewable share of the Nuremberg energy target was binding at the union level, basically, which is different from the 2020 framework, which was binding at national level. And maybe the most innovative policy, let's say, under the clean energy package was the governance mechanism, exactly to cover this change and this difference, because we needed some mechanism to help us make sure that the binding targets at union level can be met by the efforts that are being made at national levels. So we needed to make sure that the national level efforts will consequently lead to collectively meeting the union level targets. Well, the clean energy package was approved in 2019, but in December 2019, the Green Deal was proposed. And it covers basically until 2030 and beyond 2030. And it is there to tackle the EU's ambitious target of becoming the first carbon neutral economy by 2050. It is a more comprehensive framework compared to the previous two, and it covers not only energy and climate sectors, but six other policy areas. Well, because it is more comprehensive, of course, it's going to need more revisions of the policies and instruments, and also introduction of more new instruments into the framework. Overall, to achieve carbon neutrality by 2050, it was proposed that we also need to increase the 2030 GHG emission target from 40% to 55%. So these two targets are very important to achieve the objectives of the Green Deal. But as I said before, 55% is very ambitious, and it's not only about GHG emission reduction. We also need to increase the 2030 targets of renewable energy and energy efficiency. For example, for renewable electricity, we are going to need to increase it to 67% compared to the 32% achieved already in 2018. So in 12 years, we need to more than double the renewable electricity. And for energy efficiency, we are going to need to achieve at least 36% of energy efficiency instead of the 32.5%. So several policies can help here. For example, the energy efficiency can improve a lot and can play an important role, and energy efficiency policies, of course. And also, for example, building renovations can help a lot. But here in this presentation, we are not going to focus on these policies. What we are going to focus is the three main elements and components that we think are going to be key to achieve the carbon neutrality by 2050 and 55% GHG emission reduction by 2030. And these include an enhanced renewables integration, electrification, which means that we need to actually substitute other energy vectors such as gas with electricity in those sectors which is possible. For example, mobility, which we will need to enhance e-mobility. Then another key element would be adoption of green molecules, which will be needed to decarbonize those sectors which are hard to electrify, such as heavy industries, including chemicals, cements, glass, etc., and also heavy transport, such as aviation, trucks, ships, etc. So what is in the Green Deal that would focus on these elements and these key components, let's say? First, for enhancing renewable energy integration, we have the revision of Renewable Energy Directive and the TENI regulation to, for example, develop the interconnections to integrate more and more renewable energy. And then we have this new strategy on offshore renewable energy. To facilitate electrification, we have the energy system integration, and to facilitate adoption of green molecules, we have the hydrogen strategy. So in this short presentation, I try to draw a picture of what has been going on in the past in terms of EU policies, EU energy and climate policies, and what's going on now, presently, and what would be the prospect of these policies. So I think now we are going to go back to Leo and open the discussion. Thank you so much for listening, and
Thank you,
Leo, the floor
Gulnush.
is yours. Yes, thank you.
We'll come back to you in the discussion, I'm sure. Great to give us this overview from 2020 to 2030 and 2050. This slide you have on slide number 10, I think is quite amazing, right? With this evolution of targets and instruments. The poll was also interesting, completely split audience. So Anna,
True.
please, you can start by giving us your view.
Yes, well, hello everybody, and thank you for the invitation. And also, I need to congratulate Gulnush because she's really done a fantastic job putting all these things together in such a short time in a clear way. Now, I will indeed start with commenting on the poll because it will bring me naturally to just only one big issue I want to raise as a reaction to Gulnush's presentation. First of all, there's no doubt that the past support schemes in member states were generally poorly designed. I mean, nobody anticipated the speed of cost reduction in wind and solar generation. So all those support schemes have taken a very static approach to costs, and the support was also totally unrelated to the markets. Now, most member states have already adapted their schemes, and of course, Article 4 of the revised Renewables Directive is correcting this problem. And in addition, the Commission is now working on the revision of the state aid guidelines of 2014, which cover all kinds of state support, not only the support for renewable generation in electricity, which is the case for the Renewable Directive. Second point I want to make is that the targets, EU targets, are with respect to final energy consumption. The 20% is with respect to final energy consumption, not production, generation, or whatever. And it's important because, for example, in the 2020 targets were translated into 28 national binding targets, and member states have generally interpreted this to mean that they should support national production on their national territory, which is not obviously on the best location to produce low-cost wind or solar energy. And of course, the 2009 Renewable Directive already anticipated this issue by foreseeing a cooperation mechanism between member states, which actually very few member states have used, which is a pity because it would definitely have improved cost efficiency of energy support. Now, the third point I want to make is in option B, you mentioned achievements, of course, which could have very broad signification. And we should remember that although location is a key factor for the cost efficiency of production, it's just the opposite when you talk about emissions. It doesn't matter where emissions take place. The goal is to reduce global emissions and to reach a global climate objective. And renewable support in the EU, even though they have overcompensated beneficiaries, they've led to a greater diffusion of technologies, and so to lower costs within the EU, but also in the rest of the world. So the rest of the world has benefited from these lower costs thanks to EU maybe overcompensation. And maybe the only thing you can regret is that the European manufacturing industry has not drawn better benefits from this huge market. And then my fourth point, with this time relates already to Golnu's presentation, is that we should look at this these 69 billion euro of renewable support in 2018 in comparison with another statistic, because I'm a statistician, which is that in the same year, 50 billion euro were granted by member states to fossil fuels. And it is clear that these subsidies to fossil fuels have undermined the efficiency of the support for renewables and made it a lot more costly, probably. And the interesting thing is that a good chunk of these 50 billion euro for fossil fuel come likely from EU funding, member state support schemes that were approved under European state aid guidelines, and also, I would say, from the many exemptions and reduced rates that are foreseen in the European Energy Taxation Directive, which dates back from 2003, but which is still in force, despite the efforts the Commission has made to revise it towards sort of a set of more climate-friendly rules. And as a result of the unanimity rule, this directive is just the result of horse trading between member states to reach unanimity, which means that exemptions and reduction range from, Belgium getting exemptions for its yachting boats, for the production of alumina in Sardinia, and of course, complete exemption for kerosene on a maritime and air transport. And what I want to emphasize here is really the key importance for me of policy integration. And policy integration is not only, in the sense of presenting very nice packages like the Commission is very good at doing. I mean, it's in the sense of coherence of all the policies, instruments, and actions. This quality that ensures that they all work in synergy and that no policy instrument, action undermines the cost of others towards the objective of decarbonization, not only within the EU, but also outside of the EU, where I think that there are a lot more emission reduction opportunities. After all, the EU is only about 10% of global emissions, and probably even at lower cost for every euro we invest. So that's also a point I want to make. Now, if we go through this long journey of EU policy with the lens of policy coherence, we see that we have started from an extremely fragmented picture with a treaty on coal and a treaty of nuclear, and actually no energy policy to bring things together, not even that. And that we've moved progressively, mainly in the last years, towards more policy integration, first with the Energy Union, and then the Clean Energy Package that came out of that, and of course then with the Green Deal. Now, if I still have a minute, climate consideration came in the 80s and 90s, and we see already in 96 in the Electricity Internal Market Directive that came a year after COP1, by the way, that there's already awareness of the link between internal market, opening markets and renewables. And of course, the fact that we abolished monopolies, allowed the development of renewable production in the electricity market. But at the time, renewables were completely outside the market, and actually the directive provides for explicitly for priority dispatching. And then it's only more than 10 years later that we have a permanent link between climate and energy policies with the 2020 targets, and that we have also consideration of efficiency, not only energy efficiency, but also efficiency, for example, with the revision of the ETS directive that defines auctioning finally as a default method, because we should remember that until 2012, we have more than 90% which are free allocation. And initially, the ETS was not meant as the most efficient way to reduce emission. Initially, it was just a fallback position from the impossibility to adopt a carbon tax at EU level because of the unanimity rule. And then, of course, in 2015, we have this huge political project of an energy union, with, I think, the first serious attempt to integrate all aspects of climate and energy policy, including security of supply, internal market, international components, industrial components, etc. And of course, from the point of view of cost efficiency, the greatest achievement there is, of course, the new design for the electricity market, which I don't need to detail here, but clearly the flexibility is a key element in integration of policy. And finally, with the Green Deal, we go still one step further in ensuring this coherence between this time nearly all EU policies, not only within energy and climate policies, with system integration, methane strategy, etc., but also with all the other EU policies, such as agriculture, circular economy, industrial policy, etc. And I want to mention especially the energy taxation directive, which I've already explained needed revision. I also want to mention very quickly the funding aspects, because in the EU budget for the next period, we often mention that there is 30% for climate action. But what we don't mention often is that the other 70% are subject to no harm principles. And that means that these 70% cannot go against the climate objective. So there is a need for coherence, full coherence within the budget. Obviously, there is the green finance, which is, for financial market, it's a huge step towards more efficient decarbonization. And then I want to mention the international aspects, where beside the methane initiative that Gonus has mentioned, I want to mention the carbon border adjustment mechanism, which is not only something, to ensure a better level playing fields between our industries and third countries' industry, but it's also a question of coherence. We should care about the carbon footprint of what we consume, whether emission, where come from inside the EU or outside of the EU. That is, it's important that our imports do not import carbon emission. So just to conclude, I think it's only with a fully coherent policy framework that we can reach cost-efficient decarbonization. And to ensure this coherence, we need this good governance that I hope the regulation will provide us. That means having a better set of rules by implicating everybody upwards in the definition of rules, also at local level, proper implementation, and of course, a much better monitoring and evaluation, like we've already seen in the reports that the Commission published last month. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Anna. I'm happy to hear from you that the number of instruments is not only increasing in quantity, but also in quality, and that we're improving the coherence of the policy, as you say. And this number you mentioned of fossil fuels still getting this 50 billion really is mind-blowing if you think about it, because we don't often mention that number, but we often talk about the subsidies of renewables, right? Before you move to the second part, maybe I just quickly ask Ronnie to very shortly come in on this part, because Anna mentioned manufacturing. So Ronnie, you as a technology expert, is there something you can say? I mean, have we been able to get some of the benefits of this technology leadership or not, and why not? If you can just shortly comment.
Yeah, if I flip through the technologies that were mentioned, let's be honest, we lost the manufacturing of the PV, but we might regain it with building integrated PV, which is technology that is adapted to each building. So it has to be produced locally. So that may be a game changer in the decade to come. Offshore wind, we still are in the lead. Onshore wind also, though China is picking up because it's a more serial production. I think that so PV, massive PV is gone. Batteries are gone. Uh, I think electrolyzers for hydrogen, that's also mass technology. I think we should really look to technologies that are made to measure, that are integrated in buildings, that are really bringing up specific things where you have to do a lot of engineering and manufacturing on the spot. Otherwise, it will always be cheaper to have it produced in low budget countries. But also, what is important is that a lot of it is going to be grid integration, and grids are made at the place where the grids are. So we should very much look that we keep that technology on grids and don't sell that again like we do with other things. So grids for me are critical, and then made to measure technologies in renewables and in energy efficiency for buildings.
Thank you, Ronnie. There is one quick question, and then we move to the Piero's part. There is a question by Birgitte, who makes a reference to the taxonomy regulation that will, she thinks, play a key role. Maybe Anna, you can say a word about that. There seems to be a leaked document of that regulation, and that, do you agree that that is a key regulation to keep an eye on?
Of course, of course. I mean, in fact, that's one of the instruments that I've not mentioned, but I've mentioned the purpose of this is green finance. I mean, the idea is to have a taxonomy of the different investments so that we try to reorient private funds towards green investments. And of course, there is the issue of what is green investment. And because it's become very fashionable to say, as a publicity for banks, etc., to say, we are green, we want also to avoid what's called greenwashing. And that's why there is this discussion on taxonomy. But we've already have some rules, right? I mean, we are at the stage of getting into more details. So,
okay, thank you, Anna. Thank you again, also Golnoush. Let's jump to Piero, because Piero, you have some numbers for us, right?
Right.
Now let's get more deep in some numbers of the future. So go ahead, Piero.
Okay. Okay. Everyone seeing the slides? Just to
Yes,
confirm?
go ahead.
Okay, great. So whereas my colleague Golnoush has spoken about EU energy policies, I'll be speaking about the cost of technologies. And in particular, it's essential because, as we were speaking before, we were speaking about renewable electricity subsidies in order to make renewable electricity technologies cost competitive with others or not. Now, you see that towards 2030, 2050 EU decarbonization, we'll need several different technologies. Of course, renewable electricity technologies and hydrogen technologies are not the only ones, and energy efficiency will also play a key role, but we decided to focus on these two ones here, which, as Golnoush has mentioned, are gaining a lot of attention debate in terms of cost and policy support needed. So if you were the managers of the transition of EU decarbonization and this challenge, you'll be facing ambitious targets of EU decarbonization by 2050. You'll be facing a limited budget and a short amount of time. So which technological choices you do, and as soon as possible, and how you justify it in terms of costs and benefits will be critical. And especially depending on the cost evidence, we'll also have to shape which kind of policies we'll try to deploy in order to promote these technologies. So in order to provide some evidence for policy making, what I did was gather cost data from different well-renowned studies in this field. So here I list some of the sources I have included in my study. So we have International Energy Agency IEA 2020 cost studies, Bloomberg New Energy Finance, IRENA, the International Renewable Energy Agency, Lazar, and also other media sources. And one point I would like to highlight to the audience is that cost studies released in the last year, 2019, are already outdated, both in terms of recent estimates of costs and what their assumptions on the future costs of these technologies will be. So it's quite a dynamic field which is evolving rather quickly. First piece of the puzzle, renewable electricity technologies. So here I present some of the findings of my research. On the left, you can see the plot with the recent estimates of worldwide levelized costs of renewable electricity technologies. I present the ranges, including the minimum, the average, and the maximum levelized costs, and in particular, for 4 renewable electricity technologies. These are, in yellow, utility scale solar, in orange, rooftop scale solar, in light blue, onshore wind farm, and in dark blue, offshore wind farm. Now, on the right, instead, you have another piece of finding. So which are the future assumptions on worldwide levelized costs according to the studies I previously mentioned, and for the same 4 technologies by both 2030 and 2050. What I would like to highlight here is that first, there is quite a lot of variability in terms of the recent estimates on worldwide levelized costs, but there is also quite a significant amount of uncertainty and variability in terms of the future assumptions of the 3 technologies for which data is available, utility scale solar, onshore wind farm, and offshore wind farm. And at the same time, this variability is driven both because of the difficulty of assuming costs, but also because each cost study has also its own way of forecasting studies and its own characteristics. For example, we know well that Bloomberg Energy Finance is famous for being bullish about their renewable electricity cost assumptions in the future, whereas IEA, International Energy Agency, could be considered to be more slightly conservative compared to Bloomberg Energy Finance assumptions. In terms of recent estimates, these wide ranges are also justified by the fact that, as I said, this field is fastly evolving, and the cost studies by Lazard, which were released last month, include an average and minimum worldwide levelized cost for these technologies, which is significantly smaller than the worldwide levelized costs included in studies at the beginning of this year. So we have to take into account these fast dynamics. Second piece of the puzzle, the cost of hydrogen technologies. But before going into that, I have to explain to the audience what is hydrogen. Why do we need hydrogen towards EU decarbonization? How is hydrogen produced? Well, hydrogen is not available naturally. It's not like coal, it's not like uranium, it's not like sun irradiation. It has to be artificially or synthetically derived from another input fuel, be it, for example, water and renewable electricity or natural gas. Why do we need it? Well, currently in EU, we can identify 2 main types of hydrogen uses. First one, industrial feedstock uses, for which hydrogen is consumed as a raw material in order to derive industrial goods. Some examples are refined oil, chemicals, or even steel and iron. The second type are energy carrier uses, for which hydrogen is consumed as an energy fuel in order to deliver energy services to the consumers. Some examples of energy services are mobility, or heating, or even electricity. In EU by 2019, industrial feedstock uses amounted to the majority of hydrogen uses, circa 10 megatons of hydrogen, whereas the energy carrier uses amounted to circa 0.7 megatons of hydrogen. However, in EU decarbonization scenarios, the amount of energy carrier uses is forecast to increase greatly by 2030 and 2050. Third point, how is hydrogen produced? Currently, hydrogen is mostly produced from fossil fuel-based technologies with high greenhouse gas emissions. However, there are already alternatives available, which are either zero or low emission production technologies. Here I report 3 examples. Green hydrogen, whose technology is electrolyzer, and it's a commercially available technology which requires as an input water and renewable electricity. Second one, blue hydrogen, whose technology is steam methane reforming plant with carbon capture and storage. It's a technology which is commercially available, and it's a sort of update compared to the fossil fuel-based technology steam methane reforming. And its input is natural gas. Third and finally, turquoise hydrogen, whose technology is methane pyrolysis with CCU, carbon capture and utilization, which converts mainly natural gas into hydrogen and solid carbon. And it's a technology which is currently in prototype phase. As I might say also, one key point is it's important to notice that there are also uses of synthetic fuels which can be derived from hydrogen. I will not enter here into full details, but when considering energy carrier uses, you do need to consider that, for example, synthetic methane, synthetic liquid fuels, ammonia, and methanol are all derived from hydrogen, and therefore the hydrogen supply chain is quite vast. Final point for the audience, hydrogen can be produced domestically in EU, or it can also be imported. And given this brief introduction, I would like to pose to the audience a second online poll. So by 2030 in EU, which hydrogen supply option do you believe will be the cheapest? A, domestic green hydrogen. B, domestic blue or turquoise hydrogen, so based on natural gas. C, imported hydrogen, be it green or blue. And D, it's not clear, or there is not enough evidence to be able to choose one of these three previous options. Now the floor is up to the audience. Okay. It's rather interesting to see that there is not a clear preference, and actually if we had to choose one, it will be domestic blue and turquoise hydrogen, which will be the cheapest. We can later investigate the reasons why the public did think it was this case or not. So I would like to present the answer, which comes from our findings, and it's actually it's not clear. Now, as you can see below from this plot, in terms of future assumptions on hydrogen levelized costs according to the different cost studies I showed previously, I presented these future assumptions for 6 different hydrogen supply options, being in green, light green, domestic green hydrogen from utility scale solar PV renewable electricity, in dark green, domestic green hydrogen from offshore wind farm renewable electricity, light blue, domestic blue hydrogen, dark blue, domestic turquoise hydrogen, orange, imported green hydrogen, and yellow, imported blue hydrogen. And I present the ranges of these future assumptions on levelized costs by both 2030 and 2050. What we can see clearly is that there is quite a lot of uncertainty in assuming the cost of hydrogen for each of these different supply options. So there is not a clear definitive number, not a clear answer. It depends both on the uncertainty of different critical sub-assumptions which compose these costs, and depends also on what's your view if renewable electricity costs will actually decrease in such a way, as Bloomberg and Energy Finance say, that domestic green hydrogen costs will decrease so greatly. At the same time, I would like to, for example, show for you that there is also, according to different studies, there are different views. So for example, in 2030, IEA is the only source which included one assumption which I could find on imported green hydrogen costs. Whereas instead by 2050, you can see that Bloomberg and Energy Finance included some assumption points which had a smaller cost. So they are the lower portion of this range, whereas IEA had included different options, but mostly within the middle and upper part of this range. So this is an example of the discrepancy you also find between these different studies. And of course, you see that these ranges overlap. There is not a clear answer which we can give right now based on current evidence. I will go into the detail into why there is such an uncertainty in terms of hydrogen costs for these different supply options. If we decompose the cost of domestic green hydrogen into different critical factors which determine their uncertainty, we identified in our study in particular 4 critical assumptions for domestic green hydrogen costs. These are electricity costs, so the cost of the input fuel, the capacity factor of full load hour, which determines the operational characteristics of the electrolyzer machine, capex, so the cost of the machine electrolyzer, and then also interest rate, which determines the cost of the capital for the investments in the machine. Additionally, one common element to all of these six hydrogen supply options are also the transport and storage costs within EU territories. If we look at these critical assumptions for domestic green hydrogen, we also justify why we had to split the domestic green hydrogen case into two subcases: utility scale solar PV and offshore wind farm. In fact, as we saw, the levelized costs for utility scale solar PV and offshore wind farm do differ significantly right now and also in terms of future assumptions. And they are also characterized by different capacity factors, which will also impact on the assumptions on costs of green hydrogen. Another example I can also provide on the uncertainties which underlie the costs of supply options of hydrogen is, for example, the one of imported green hydrogen, so the fifth column. So for imported green hydrogen, we identify some critical sub-assumptions, which are, for example, production costs abroad, then the transport costs from abroad until the import hub within EU, the storage costs until the import hub, and finally, of course, the transport and storage costs within the EU territories to deliver that hydrogen molecule to the final consumer. So with this, I would like to thank you for your attention. I remain available for any questions, comments, or feedback, and I give the floor back to Leonardo.
Thank you, Piero. So you clearly do not have a favorite color, but we thank you a lot for as neutrally as possible giving us an overview of the studies on the one hand, but also that you even took the time to dig into some of the assumptions and sub-assumptions that all studies have to make to even come to a number. So please, Ronnie, what's your view on this poll? Don't forget to unmute.
On mute, so I cannot say any stupid things. But anyway, Piero, as you know, I digged into the study during the work, so we are not going to discuss those details. But I think we should make a few real comments here, and it's very difficult. What's very difficult is that people think that they can have separate files. And that's something I would much appreciate if people would read the study, that they see that the files are coupled. For instance, if people are saying, and one of your figures is the price of hydrogen in euro per kilogram of hydrogen, and then you have to multiply that figure by 33 to get the price in euro per megawatt hour. Okay, and then you see that sometimes the price that some people are giving a price in euro per megawatt hour for hydrogen, which is lower than the electricity price, which is surprising for me. And we discussed that very much in detail, and you have to put all those numbers together and really to see how the things are working together to get there. And it was also discussed in the previous interventions. We have to look very carefully about the units. Although energy is megawatt hours, a megawatt hour is not a megawatt hour. You cannot do the same things with it. If you have 1 megawatt hour of green heat, it has not the same value for use as 1 megawatt hour of electricity. And I think that even the idea that you can measure the green output of what is used by a consumer is not a real good measure. And this really is very interesting to debate and to discuss and to work on that. When I looked at the poll, yeah, lucky we made the fact that we did the blue hydrogen and turquoise hydrogen together, so we really get a poll with the same numbers. Otherwise, we could have had a debate. But domestic blue is a very weird thing. It assumes that you have CCS, which we don't have. There are a lot of assumptions in there. And that's something which is really very interesting on the hydrogen story, that hydrogen people assume that other people are doing a good job. They assume that there is a perfect CCS. They assume that there is a perfect CCU, and they assume that there is a massive amount of green energy. And then they start to think. I think we have to be very careful that those assumptions probably will not be met. And that's the real challenge that I wanted to point out and discuss with other people. I'm not going to go into details and going further, but really the link between all those files, which were also mentioned by Ganush, that there's a lot of regulatory and on legal aspects and files which have to be set up. That's one thing, but that's the easiest thing. Each of these files is coupled to the other one. If you want to do a market redesign, you cannot no longer do it on a megawatt hour basis. You have to have other measures for that market. If you want to do a market for megawatt hours of hydrogen, you suppose that the electricity market is working perfectly. And the link, the web of those measures, this is going, from my point of view, being the most important one that the EU has to tackle. Even if there are mistakes in each of the files, I don't care. But the feedback loops in between all those, that web of measures, that web of regulations, that is going to be a magnificent task to be doing. I give you an example. If we are going to have a hydrogen market, will we have an unbundled pipeline system? Or is it going to be a closed pipeline system? Are we going to have a market which has a common entry and a free entry to all the pipelines of Air Liquide, etc.? Is there going to be a level playing field in transport? If we have a methanol made out of hydrogen, is it going to be transported by ships? So it's not a monopoly for transport. How are you going to have all those renewable carriers in a comparable way? And your study has done a good step in that direction by putting hydrogen electricity on a similar level. Leo, these were my comments.
Thank you, Ronnie. Unless Piero wants to react, but I saw you nodding, so I guess you're mainly in agreement.
Yes.
Then maybe Anna, if you want to also make an opening comment about hydrogen.
No, I very completely agree with what Ronnie has said. But to me, one of the key issue is not so much whether we import or not. The key issue is whether we're not doing greenwashing. And when hydrogen is produced outside, what kind of means do we have to monitor the emissions that were produced? That to me is very important. I mean, and it relates a bit to one of the points that Ronnie made earlier on solar panels, that where in a way we've lost the market, but there also I wanted to say it doesn't matter so much if we can import cheap solar panels and have broader diffusion, so broader reduction of carbon in a cheaper way in the EU. And we should remember that figures show that the added value in the EU is higher with imported panels than with local, than if we impose, like dumping measures to try to keep production only within the EU. So the equation again is very complicated, but I think this is an important issue, to be able to control things, and also to make sure that we don't have huge amount of subsidies for CCS, CCU that will actually, and that are promoted by all the gas producers and oil producers. Why is that? Because they want to keep business as usual. And so this will create huge distortions with green hydrogen. So we have to be very, very careful the way because we will need probably blue hydrogen in the transition, but we don't want this to be a pretext to keep the old model of fossil fuel production.
Thank you, Anna. Piero?
Yeah, if I may react to just some interesting comments from Anna, also regarding the question of the benefits of hydrogen. We are speaking about EU decarbonization using hydrogen technologies. Now, in some national plans, for example, you see references to importing hydrogen from Australia or other countries. But indeed, do we actually measure the greenhouse gas emissions from that hydrogen production in those other countries? And do we measure the greenhouse gas emissions from the transport and storage of hydrogen route? And the same question must be posed, though, for national production, because at the end of the day, I did show the numbers and figures for domestic green hydrogen according to the studies, but you do have to criticize the fact that we're speaking about renewable electricity And if we plug this electrolyzer to the grid, then in this case, in our current grid power system in Europe, we clearly do not have a green electricity. And actually, the results from one study by Poyer, which are rather interesting, show that by having grid connected hydrogen, nowadays we produce more GHG emissions than by having fossil fuel based hydrogen production. So there again is what relates to all of it. We must also clearly put everything on the same consistent level of which are the emissions, which are the sources we are using. Are we accounting for all the factors? Are we accounting for methane emissions from the natural gas supply chain or not? In order to truly give a picture which enables us to reach the EU decarbonization. Otherwise, we're just giving numbers like this casually and facts without linking them and properly giving evidence, scientific evidence that will reach that plan. So I think there has to be a solid ground and a solid understanding that there are many assumptions to be criticized. And that's one of the main highlights and main, I say, added values of the study I have been working on. So please take a look at it and feel free to comment and criticize it also.
Thank you, Piero. I'm going to read out 3 questions because we had a 4th one that Ronnie already answered in the chat. So the 3 remaining are, and then any of you can come in and pick one or several. So one question is on the EU ETS. So if the carbon price goes up, how does that impact the various hydrogen technologies? Would that have an impact on all of them, or would it favor one or the other? So EU ETS as an instrument and in combination with hydrogen. Question number 1. The other question elaborates on what Piero just said. Is hydrogen going to come from Australia, or where is it going to come from? For all those that voted that they believe in imports, is imports Australia, or can it be all the way closer to us? Is it even Norway, or how would Norway be accounted in this story? Then there was also a clarification question on the numbers Piero showed on the levelized cost that we currently have for renewables. That's a huge variation we saw in your graph. So is one explanation, Sebastian is asking, due to the location or penetration in different markets, that some markets are just doing the low-hanging fruits and others are maybe already more advanced? Or what else is the explanation? Who wants to go first? Ronnie, maybe you can go.
Yeah, then I take the last question. It's for sure that there is an enormous amount of difference in between the place of a PV panel on the globe and the levelized cost on the megawatt hours invested. If you look at, I think it's now 12 cents per kilowatt hour. It's 1.2 cents per kilowatt hour in Portugal or something like that. It's immensely. For wind, it's far less. But certainly for PV, it's really depending on where you are. For wind, of course, onshore wind is depending, but offshore wind, if you are in the windy surroundings and you wouldn't build anywhere else, then it's the same.
Okay, Ronnie, Piero?
Yeah, I do confirm what Ronnie says. So that, for example, I included that range there at the lowest. The minimum point was the world record bits in solar PV actions, and the latest one was in Portugal at 10 euros per megawatt hour. So we are already reaching incredible prices for this technology in some record locations, whereas you have surely their locations which are less favorable, and depending also on the age of the technology, and you also notice that for sure you have higher levelized costs, and that would be correspond to the higher portion of the range there. Yeah.
And what about hydrogen origin? If in all those studies that talk about imports, Anna, you want to say something? You still have to unmute, Anna.
Yes. Sorry. Hydrogen green hydrogen can come from any place in the world where it is cheap to produce. That is where the source is cheap. It could come from Africa. It's a big potential for Africa, where they have a huge potential in solar energy, because contrary to direct renewables, which is mainly capital intensive, hydrogen is not so much capital intensive. And so I think this gives an opportunity for some regions of the world, which are actually poor regions, to produce this. And then, of course, there may be attempts by or traditional oil and gas suppliers in the Middle East, for example, to use their gas to export to us blue hydrogen. But this will depend on what they can do on the CCS, because CCS, even the best CCS now only removes like 90% of emissions. We're not at the same, we're not at zero emissions. So, I mean, and the interesting things for the future is could change the geopolitical landscape of energy,
Thank
because
you,
new
Anna.
parts of the world could become producers.
Ronnie, very
Yeah,
short last word,
very,
and then I'll
very,
conclude.
very short link of files. If you have CCS, you use methane, you use natural gas, and 1% exhaust of loss of natural gas gives you 25%, 25 units of CO2 equivalent. So again, you see the link of different files.
Thank you, Ronnie. So happy to conclude by saying, great job, Piero Golnush. You've done a lot of work. And now everybody wants to know when this study is going to get published. So it's in the coming days, right? You already have a
Yes.
nice picture of the front. The rest has been written, and then it will be published. And I'm sure Christopher Jones, Andris Piebalgs, and Jean-Michel Glachon, who were together with you producing this study, will organize another event to celebrate the publication of that big study. And in the meanwhile, you can also contact Golnush and Piero. I also want to end, besides this commercial that the study is coming, by thanking once more Anna and Ronnie. By accident, we had two Belgians as discussants today, and you should know that it's a holiday in Belgium today. Today we celebrate the end of the World War I, and they are again in a lockdown due to the pandemic. So that's why they were like, okay, it's holiday, but we'll come and join you in this live event. We are not able to leave the home anyway. But they're smiling. And the reason they're smiling is that we were very quick in getting to a second wave, but we peaked. And since a few days, the peak is going down. And so in a few days from now, Ronnie and Anna will be back on the street smiling. And in the meantime, we thank them. And I'm happy to close the event and see you soon for another online